All right, New Testament readers, this week we are going to continue in the pastoral epistles, First and Second Timothy and Titus. We'll do First Timothy and a bit of Second Timothy this week. We began those last week, and these letters Paul is writing to associates in ministry, people who had really apprenticed with Paul in his ministry, and now they are leading churches. And Paul is writing very practical but gospel-grounded advice to them as he writes this letter. So what's happening in 1 Timothy? We're picking up in chapter 2, where Paul says, lead the church to live together in unity and mutual respect for one another. There's some controversial language in this about the place of women in the church. I would suggest that we think about this as observing culturally based gender differences in a way that communicates respect for one another, that we really care more about one another than we do for our own place in the body. And this means that we'll constantly be deferring to one another in ways that elevate others and never elevate ourselves. In chapter 3, Paul talks about the qualifications of church leaders, the episkopos or overseer, sometimes translated bishop, and the diakonos or deacon or servant. And in both cases, these are to be people in whom the gospel has made an impression that can be seen in the way that they live. In all observable areas of life, they are moving towards Christ-likeness, godliness. And so chapter 4, Paul is admonishing Timothy to avoid the world's chaos, really to counter it, as it were, with his orderly faithfulness and the orderly faithfulness of the church that he leads. So the church should pursue generosity and orderliness as it is administering relief to widows, as he goes on in chapter 5. This church in Ephesus that Timothy leads had an extensive program of supporting widows who were in need, but that created issues and problems, as we can imagine, but also opportunities for women to take positions of influence and leadership and to display godliness, and for the church to demonstrate Christ-like generosity. So in chapter 6, summing up, Paul says, don't live in disrepute as so many do, and be especially aware of the seductive power of wealth. Certainly a message that is not bounded by time or place. Well, we'll begin 2 Timothy. We'll get a couple of chapters this week. And this is Paul's farewell letter. We can tell from beginning to end that Paul is a prisoner. This is perhaps what we read about when Paul is in Rome at the end of the book of Acts. But this may be a second imprisonment that came later. There are reasons for thinking that. Regardless, though, Paul is saying to Timothy, these are really my final words. And in these first two chapters, he says to Timothy, now, you remember why and how you came to be who you are. Remember the influences on you. Remember the gift that was given to you. Remember the charge that you have. And remember Jesus, because he's the real reason that you are a follower of Jesus, right? And so chapter 2, live as a faithful soldier. Live faithfully as the Lord Jesus did himself. Be like something or someone who is useful in a household, who has something to contribute. Always the focus is on what you do for others, not on how you live for yourself. Never on selfishness, always on the example of Christ who gave himself for others. All right, so read these letters carefully. Watch especially, Paul will say, this is a faithful saying, or these words are faithful. When he says something like that, he's probably drawing on kind of standardized Christian teaching that he and the others had developed, ways of really catechizing people in the faith and reminding Timothy of how those sayings are applicable to the ministry that he's doing. You know, when it comes down to it, it's all about the gospel and living according to the gospel. All right, enjoy your reading in 1 and 2 Timothy this week.